Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Zoom conversation on style and resistance. My name is Oluwaseyi Taiwo Olowoake. I am the TD Curatorial Fellow here at the Polygon, and I would first like to acknowledge that the Polygon Gallery, which this event is hosted through, is situated on the village of Aslahan, home to the Squamish Nation, and on the territories of the Tsleil-Waututh and the Musqueam nations. It is important to not only think of what this means for us as uninvited settlers, but also to actively live and work in our various spheres of influence, honoring the owners of these lands, but also honoring their knowledges. And I say that with great humility because I realize that we have a long way to go. And so I would like to thank and give my gratitude to the owners of this land. This event is part of our programming for the exhibition currently up at the Polygon Gallery, which is curated by Elliott Ramsey, called As We Rise, Photography from the Black Atlantic. The photographs are part of a larger collection owned by Dr. Kenneth Montague called the Wedge Collection, Canada's largest privately owned collection committed to championing Black artists. The Wedge Collection was started in 1997 in Toronto by Dr. Ken to acquire and exhibit art that explores Black identity. Montague also founded Wedge Curatorial Projects, a non-profit arts organization that supports emerging Black artists. The conversation today brings together Jorian Charlton, Jamal Nxedlana, and Elliott Jerome Brown Jr., based in Toronto, Johannesburg, and Queens, New York, respectively, to discuss their processes, their perspectives on agency and artistic control in contemporary photography, and how photographic subjects become co-creators of their own images. From the way they are styled to their relationship with the camera, the figures in these artists' works are not passive sitters, but performers and collaborators. So each artist will present their work, after which there'll be a conversation moderated by Elliott Ramsey, and then we will take questions from the audience. But now on to our artists. Jorian Charlton is a photographer working in portraiture. Her work focuses on Jamaican-Canadian culture through her personal experiences and that of her community, highlighting themes of Black family life, intimacy, community, and love. Charlton takes poetic approaches to her portraits, working with her models to create atmospheres, fashions, and poses that tell stories about Caribbean diasporas while addressing contemporary modes of Black representation. Jamal Nxedlana is a visual artist and cultural organizer living and working in Johannesburg, South Africa. He is the founder of a number of independent organizations that support the South African arts community, among which is Bubblegum Club, a digital platform and cultural agency showcasing innovative new work and creating opportunities for emerging cultural workers. He is also a founding member of COS Group, a Johannesburg-based artist collective that has been exploring the hybrid culture of post-colonial South Africa over the past decade. As a solo artist, his practice addresses the portrayal of the Black body in fashion photography while exploring themes of race, masculinity, post-colonialism, and consumer culture. Nxedlana has exhibited in galleries, institutions, and independent spaces internationally. Most recently, his images were featured in the collective shows The New Black Vanguard, curated by Antoine Sargent, and Orlando, curated by Tilda Swinton. And Elliott Jerome Brown Jr. is an artist using photography to explore representation through privacy and fiction. Occasionally, the work turns away from the standard archival print to examine photography as a sculptural, redactive, and site-specific process. He has completed residencies at a Bronze Art Center in New York, St. Roch Community Church in New Orleans, Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture in Maine. He is the 2022 NYSCA NYFA Artist Fellow in Photography and received the Rema Hortman Foundation Emerging Artist Grant in 2019. Brown received his BFA in photography from New York University and is a part-time lecturer in photography at the New School in New York. He is represented by Nickel Buchian in New York and is based in Queens, New York. He's currently working with Mass Editions on releasing a book for publication this spring. And finally, to to our moderator, Elliott Ramsey. Elliott Ramsey is the curator of the Polygon Gallery on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. He holds a Master of Arts degree in Comparative Media Arts from Simon Fraser University. His 2021 exhibition, Interior Infinite, presented self-portraiture through masquerade and disguise, featuring internationally acclaimed artists, including Nick Cave, Martin Gutierrez, Zanel Moholi, and Kerry May Weems. He has juried the 2022 Viva and Sylvie Awards and recently curated the touring exhibition As We Rise, Photography from the Black Atlantic, presented by Aperture. And now I will pass it over to Elliott for his presentation.
Well, thank you. Michael, if you could pull up the presentation, that would be fab. Okay, and let's start from the first image. Okay, all right, cool. So thank you again for having me. I'm excited to be a part of this conversation. I wanted to start with the image that is, the reason why I'm even a part of this conversation. This is a work that Kenneth Montague collected for the Wedge collection alongside another image. And Kenneth was actually, I think, my first collector. I think he purchased this from me in the year that it was made, or maybe in the following year, because I didn't like this image for a while. So I wasn't really working with it for some time. But yeah, he reached out to me directly in that kind of spot, put this process of being like an artist, or being like an artist who is collected, forward. So I wanted to start here for a few reasons. The first reason is that this image, as I'll kind of explain, like how it sits in the context of my work at large. I work in representation, but I try to do so in a way that is discreet. And I try to do so in a way that also kind of redacts a lot of information. And that has several justifications as to why. But one of them is that I'm really interested in fiction, and I'm also interested in how our biographies can lend themselves to something much more than the chronology of our experiences, or like the real-time experience of our lives. So this image, it was made in real time, but I asked this person to kind of improvise it based off something that I had observed him doing. And it was, for me, a way to indicate intimacy while not necessarily indicating who the person is, and as well not indicating like the context for the image, even though there are a number of things that can be assumed. This is a person who's in a hotel. This is a person who is presumably nude. This is a person who, maybe from there you can also assume like what our relationship to one another is as well. But I'm never really wanting to kind of lead with that information. I'm more interested in what the image kind of allows you to speculate, or what you might do in the absence of like confirmed information. And then that kind of leads me to the titling. At the time, this was at the beginning of my practice as an artist. It's kind of funny to be looking at this as it was made 7 years ago. But this was at the beginning of me kind of negotiating how I wanted to work with other individuals, how I wanted to represent them in space. And so I wasn't really titling things very often, but as I was thinking of what the title could be for this, I found myself thinking about other artists' practice, like Peter Hujar or Dawu Bey, people who kind of name things like subject first, and then they kind of emphasize some kind of object within the frame. So in this case, Devin, the subject, and then the Red Sox being the kind of the next layer that I want you to pay attention to. And there was something for me that was really affectionate about that gesture of, I like identifying who it is in the photograph, and then as well situating it alongside, like, you know, the part of the photograph that maybe drives me, or that drives maybe the symbolism of the image. Yeah, so we can move on to the next slide. So just kind of continuing on this like vein of titling, I've been inspired and have referenced quite a bit the Paris exposition that Thomas Callaway and W.E.B. Du Bois put on in 1900. And, you know, they kind of put this exhibition together as the first time that America has really recognized Black Americans within its pavilion. So like these kind of expositions were things that people were doing to be like, hey, y'all, look at what we as a country are up to. They're kind of like Olympics for like nationalism, but like narrative and technological advancement. So 4 months before this exposition was meant to go on, Thomas Callaway had kind of made a plea to the American government, you know, can we do something as it relates to how Black people have been living in America following slavery? And, you know, it's now at this point been 40 years from the Emancipation Proclamation, or 40 years since the last group of people are notified of the Emancipation Proclamation. And yeah, they wanted to think about what progress has been made. And he had previously kind of set up expositions in, I believe, Nashville and also Atlanta, and they were successful. And part of its success for him was its ability to basically communicate to white people that Black people were viable contributors to the nation, that they had, you know, done a lot in these 35, 40 years post-slavery. So they put on this exposition of like hundreds of photographs, and all of them are unattributed. And in this book called A Small Nation of People, that where one of the editors is Deborah Willis, who is one of the chairpeople, or chairperson rather, at NYU in the photo department, which is also where I went. So shout out Deb. The introduction kind of harps on the fact that these photographs are unattributed. The photographer is not identified. There's no title to them. They're each just kind of presented on the wall, and there's like a small number under them. And that person kind of harps on that fact, saying that these photos really existed as evidence, like, as though on a chart. And so you are meant to kind of be able to confront this image with no real imagination beyond the surface. That your imagination should take you to, okay, this person is in a nurse's uniform, which I personally would have never guessed, but based on the research that Deb Willis and her co-editor, whose name I'm blanking on, and I apologize for that, they kind of put together that this person is in a nursing uniform. She's demonstrating intelligence by way of the book kind of being splayed open in front of her. Perhaps this person in the image behind her is somebody that she's connected to. And all of this kind of like exists within a trajectory of representation that kind of has its, I think maybe is most prominently understood like through Renaissance painting, where people are figured in a way to, I don't know, yeah, kind of like gather their status, what it is that their function in life is. So if they're a scholar, they'll be presented with a book. If they are a priest, they'll be presented with some kind of holy text, or maybe like a rosary bead, or maybe there'll be like a sprig of like rosemary in their bosom or something like that to kind of indicate remembrance. All of these really small symbols that are meant to help you think about that person's relationship to society at large. And so I bring that up here because this image was previously untitled and it remains untitled, but the Library of Congress refers to it through the brackets where it says nursing student wearing a starched white uniform, seated in a rocking chair reading. And again, all of that information is courtesy of the work that Deborah Willis and her co-editor rather, took up in the research that they did. And again, just kind of pointing at how this image doesn't really reference her interiority, but rather her profession and her usefulness in society. And I will like kind of share a little bit more about how that has inspired my practice, but we'll go to the next image. So still kind of focusing on titling this image by Zanele Maholi from her Faces and Phases project, where she kind of was documenting other queer Black, uh, mostly women, people who are lesbians or femmes, trans, etc. Just kind of documenting them as part of this project that she was doing, that is kind of ongoing, I believe, in South Africa. And just looking at the titling here of this image, the person's name comes first, and then where they're kind of located in South Africa comes afterwards. So this kind of helps orient you as a viewer, at the very least, that this is this person, in representation of themselves, in representation of this moment, but as well represented within the backdrop and the context of this particular place in South Africa. So yeah, with this, I just want to continue like harping on titling and how titling is navigating the image in the way that Devin and Red Sox is kind of also trying to do that. So next slide. And then this image by Dawood Bey, where this man who is not named, and I always find that kind of interesting. You know, I know a lot, it's really popular in street photography for people to just be inspired, like to go and make an image, and like maybe they never ever meet this person again. And so this person really exists as like a stranger for the duration of this image. But anytime I see like an image like this that's made in a documentary context and the title kind of references this person as a man or a woman or a person, etc., I'm always really like a bit like pricked by that, because this person ideally would represent so much more than just being this man. And also, we live in a different world than 1988. Like we're now in 2023, to kind of like the main signifier of this person was his manhood. How would one kind of go about this practice now? Would you be able to kind of make that assumptions? Was that made clear to you in the brief moment that you were making this photograph? Whatever. But moving on, he kind of does the same thing as Devin and Red Sox does, where he's pairing subject with object. And this is a man wearing an Adami cap. And I would assume that this man wearing this cap was important for Dawood as somebody who worked often in Brooklyn, and this kind of being a company that serviced brownstone renovation. So again, the title being a way to help you navigate this image, and like, you thinking about this person as a purveyor of cultural architecture, that was like kind of common throughout Brooklyn at the time, and it continues to be common throughout Brooklyn at the time. So next image. So this, going back to me, this is an image of mine where I'm using the title as a way to kind of help the viewer understand that there's more than one person in this image. So this is another image from the same year as which Devin and Red Sox was made, where it was made in real time, but it was made in a way to kind of achieve like a theatricality, so that you're a little maybe disoriented as to whether or not this is something that was instructed or posed, or if this was actually something that took place. And that kind of spot between like documentary and theater is really the space that I continue to exist in, at least compositionally. And again, the use of the title, Vanessa is this person here in various shades of pink and maroon. And Diane is the person here in the margins of the frame, who is holding this glass up. And yeah, this is again just like my way of like the way that I frame is, I try to make everything in the frame important and not just the thing that makes itself immediate. And I also don't really work with a lot of direct representations of individuals, so it's very few faces straight on. And that also was kind of inspired by Zanele, in that I remember learning about that work when I was in undergrad, and just being so unnerved that someone thought, a face could really hold could really hold like the impressions of an individual or the interiority of an individual. So I became more interested in how I could use every element of the photograph to maybe indicate something much larger than that individual, and how that largeness might then kind of be zoomed back in on that person. So privacy and objects and fiction and redaction have all become really useful tools to that end. And then next slide. Fast forwarding to now, and this practice really began in 2018, But this is an example from 2020 where the titling is more of an abstraction of some detail in the photograph itself. And sometimes the abstraction of that detail is really the sensation that I had in the process of making it, or the context that was available to me or that I'm aware of, and abstracting that context via language and then offering that back to the photograph. So this one, something about the instance of a stain that makes you feel powerless to it. None of that is meant to help you navigate this photograph of any kind of confirmation. It's there really more so for me, like, you know, for me to kind of consider all of the things that this photograph can begin to touch on, or maybe just a few of those things. And it allows me to work with photographs in a much more flexible way. Like they feel less committed and pinned down by time in this way. And then lastly, the next slide. Oh, can you just take the highlight off of this image? Thank you. So I've recently, since the beginning of 2022, this work, it was made in 2021, but I had an exhibition with my gallery in 2022 where I made a decision that I didn't want to title works anymore. And I felt that the works themselves were disorienting and distancing enough that I didn't need the caption or like the text to kind of do more of that labor. So I'm relying on like the visual and like and its kind of impact on the viewer to for them, yeah, for their ability to navigate the image. So that's that.
Thank you so much, Elliot. That was really good. And I'm sure we'll have so many things to talk about in the conversation.
Mhm.
I just want to say before we move on to the next speaker, to the audience members, if you have any questions, please put it in the chat. We will be looking at that and we'll make sure to send it to the speakers. But now I'll hand it over to Jorian Charlton for her presentation.
Okay. So again, thank you for having me. There's a lot of images included in this presentation, so you can kind of just skip through. I've kind of divided like studio versus outdoor, so we can start with the one that's in the show. A lot of my work is very much friends and family. So this image in particular, the way I approach my work is very collaborative. I'll be having conversations with friends, or they might come to me with an idea, and we'll start off usually by building some sort of a mood board, and then it just becomes a very collaborative process. So with this shoot in particular, I was photographing my friends, and we were just at one of my friends' houses, or her apartment, and I feel like my shoots are usually very experimental as well. I played around in the shoot with medium format film, as well as digital. I primarily shoot film, which I started in 2020, like middle 2020. But yeah, this shoot in particular was kind of influenced by like dancehall culture, which is Jamaican culture. So it was very supposed to be like energetic, very playful. I feel like most of the posing for this series was also like very confident, you know, assertive, like posing. For like this scene in particular, they actually weren't very fond of like this this area because the grass was very dead. So they weren't really sure when I said, hey, like, why don't we try something over here by this grass? But I just felt like with the colors and of the outfits and just the accessories, I really just wanted to play around with, you know, that color and texture. What else? Yeah, for this in particular. And in terms of the posing, it was very, again, I usually will work with a mood board. And again, for this, when you look at like dance hall, like parties and or I guess like, yeah, the posing, it's very, there is a lot of movement, I feel like. But like for this, it was just kind of, I don't know how to explain it, but just kind of still and like very impromptu. Yeah. We can skip to the next photo. So yeah, there's a few images from this series that you can kind of just go through. This is also another image of a friend, an artist that I've worked with a few times. I do enjoy like photographing in studio because it allows me to have more control over like the light and my environment. So again, very collaborative. They are a musician, so they also will come to me with a few ideas and mood boarding, and then we'll just work together during the shoot just to make sure, you know, everyone is on the same page, and I'm making sure that, you know, they're very comfortable and they have, you know, agency over their body and just how the overall flow of the shoot is going. I'll usually work with a team as well in terms of like styling and lighting, makeup, all of that. It will depend on the shoot. Not every shoot is like highly stylized or like I'll have a whole team, but this in particular, for this artist, we did have a team of people. Yeah, so you can kind of skip through. These are all from the same shoot. Okay, so this is another, this shoot was actually done in my home, which I've done a lot of shooting at my own place. I also love to shoot in domestic spaces. I've done a lot of photos like in bedrooms, living room. So I do enjoy like photographing in spaces as well. I try and use as much of my environment as possible. And for this in particular, they have become friends now, but we did meet over Instagram. Like sometimes I may attend an event and just meet somebody in passing and exchange Instagrams, and then we might plan something later, or they might ask me to collaborate on something. And yeah, so this was one of those shoots. A lot of the pieces as well for clothing were also borrowed from, you know, local artists in my community as well. So I feel like my work is very much like collaborative. Yeah, we can kind of skip through this as well. I also do love to, I like things to be very, I guess, like raw and like natural. Like if there is a piece of a stand or like the seam of the backdrop and maybe a little bit of the ceiling is showing, like I won't remove it or really clean it up. I just like the idea of, you know, something maybe being, you know, like homemade, not so clean cut. I feel like when a lot of artists shoot, maybe in the studio, like everything can be just so, I don't know, so like clean and just like rigid. So I like a little bit of, I like to play around a bit with those elements. This was also a shoot that was done in my living room. The woman in the photograph, we are also friends. This is also another collaboration. A stylist had actually reached out to me on Instagram, and she had seen these twins This was actually their very first photo shoot. They were newly signed to an agency, and yeah, she just she reached out to me just wanting to do a collaboration. This is also during COVID, so it was really hard to just actually find a space to create in. So yeah, very last minute decision, but I was like, let's shoot at my place and see what happens. Again, very experimental. In terms of direction of styling and hair, we just came up with a mood board. She said she would, just pull from a few places, and we would kind of just, just make it work, see what happens. So again, very experimental. The twins, as well as the model, the women, very like open to ideas, and also just very, I like to make the environment very comfortable. Like you have all the say. So yeah, and everybody was just very positive. Yeah. So we can move on. This is also another friend. Again, I do like to shoot in, indoor spaces. If possible, I do like to shoot in the person's home. In this instance, this isn't her home, but again, another collaborative project, or this project in particular was done for like a public art, not really an exhibition, but just like public art installation, which I've done a few of those. I do enjoy having my pictures printed at a large scale, and I do enjoy seeing photography printed in general. So this was included in that public art installation, or sorry, this was from the series that I did for this public art installation, but it wasn't one of the main photos. For this installation, there's 3 images from this shoot in particular. I don't remember if I added it in this slide, but it was just another project where I had like a full team, and very collaborative as well. Okay, this is a photo of siblings, which I have been working more on documenting siblings, but kind of, I would say my work is kind of documentary, but also a mix of fashion. Like I do like to have more of a style factor in some of my shoots. So this was also a shoot working with a full team, hair and makeup, and just kind of building a mood board beforehand, and styling pieces. With this one in particular, I was shooting the model on the left, and her brother just happened to be there with her. So it was kind of just a last minute decision for him to jump in, but they work very well together. So yeah. Okay, so the next few images, you can skip to the next one as well, but this is music artists, but most of these images, like I'm shooting in these people's homes. These are also some of this couple in particular. They're one of my oldest friends. And I just really felt like I just needed to document them. I feel like I'm kind of creating my own archive. I was drawing a lot of inspiration, from some of my dad's family photos, and kind of like the Black family album. So yeah, I feel like I just really love documenting my friends and family, kind of trying to create my own archive in a way. So yeah, we can go to the next one. You can skip next. Also another friend, this was shot in a friend's home as well. So yeah, all these next images are kind of indoor, which again, I do prefer to shoot on location or inside someone's home rather than a studio, because I feel like I just like to utilize my environment in a way where I can, what's the word I'm looking for? It just allows me to experiment a bit more. I feel like with studio, it can feel, it can get a bit boring for me. So I do love to just be able to, I feel like, mix lighting if I can, like maybe use of natural light and artificial, and just play around a bit more with like textures and you know, yeah.
Yes, Jorian, sorry, you just have 1 more minute. Just
Sure. So yeah, we can skip through. Again, another image in a home. And then outdoors. So yeah, these are images that I took in Jamaica of some family. Yeah, my parents are from Jamaica. I've been going since I was a child, so I feel like I've been documenting kind of since I was a teenager. So yeah, it's always nice to be able to go back when I can and, you know, photograph family and just being outdoors, since that is my preference, to be outdoors or on location. Yeah, this was. And kind of like Elliott, I don't really title my images. If I do, it is just the title or the name of the person in the photograph. Yeah.
thank you. Thank you for that. And also, again, many amazing conversations will be happening. But I'll just, for time's sake, now move on to Jamal's presentation.
Not seeing anything yet. I don't know if it's showing on your side, Shaya.
Michael?
You should just be able to press like screen share and select the window. Yeah.
Okay, so you wanted me to screen share. Okay, I thought it was on your side. Sorry about that. Okay, do that now. Okay, it just says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Right now.
Okay. Is that working?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So yeah, thank you so much for having me. My images, which are part of the exhibition, are a series that I did on the South African Music and Artist Collective, FAGA. So the editors at Aperture reached out to me to, I guess, document or profile FAGA for a feature in Aperture's issue based on Orlando, and there was also an exhibition that went with it as well. So I started by watching the film, which I'd never seen before. And the things that stood out for me from the film were these ideas of limitlessness and transformation. Okay, so it's one of the images from the film. So, you know, this idea of like limitless and transformation sort of stood out for me. And I thought these two themes were really interesting themes to use to tell the story of Faga's own journey over the years, which was very much you know, about like non-binary expression. So I also thought Johannesburg as a backdrop for the story on Faga would be quite an interesting way to tell the story, because like the film and like you know, Faga's journey over their time as a collective, Johannesburg is a city, especially over the last 30 years, that has been in constant flux. So there's an area specifically in Joburg, which I became interested in, Yeovil, and I think, you know, it characterizes the city's flux. So these are three images, you know, from Yeovil, I would say, like, you know, over like, you know, 10 different decades. So you have this image on the left, which is like Yeovil in the 1980s and early 90s, when it was this sort of like the center of arts and culture, but at the time it was still very white. So as the country transitioned into post-apartheid, you see an image from the left, which is sort of like mid-90s to early 2000s, where this area had completely transformed. It became a lot more like, I guess, like racially like diverse. And then fast forward to, I guess, like the 2010s and beyond, and the city's moved as, you know, the center of like, you know, culture, to a place that was like a center for like politics and activism, to a place that's like a neighborhood now for the African diaspora. So through the research that I was doing about like Johannesburg, and also these like themes that I was exploring, and also Yeovil, this neighborhood that I've just mentioned, I really became interested in this, or I came across this group, which was active in like the sort of early to mid 2000s, and they were called Threesome. They were the first openly queer boy band in South Africa, and they themselves had very much been a part of the story of Yeovil and the way that it had transformed. So when I came across you know, this group, I then got in touch with Faga, and they had actually been aware of this group, and you know, they loved this group and thought, you know, the work that they've been doing had been super interesting. So the shoot then became a homage to Threesome. Another layer in the work was this area called Small Street Mall. It's like a shopping district in downtown Johannesburg, and it's a space that reflects South Africa's history, in that it's racially and sort of like it's segregated by race and class, and it's a space that's maybe considered like tacky, or it's not a good look, especially for like middle class South Africans to shop from. But it's a space which where you can find, you know, some of the most radical like styles of fashion in the city, and it's a space that you know, Faga shops at, it's a space that I shop at, and you know, it's a space of sort of immense cultural value. And for us, it was important, you know, in the story that we were telling of like limitless and transformation, to not have you know, where one shops or how one behaves to be dictated by things such as class. So Small Street Mall is a place that we predominantly bought the clothes for the shoot from. So I think a day before the shoot, Faga and myself went to Small Street Mall, And these are just some images from the area, and we picked out all of the looks together for the shoot. And this is on the left, it's Fela Kuti, who's one of the members, and then you have like Desire walking down the stairs at one of the stores. And then I'll just speak about like, I guess like the process and some of the images. So you can kind of see this image. It's you can see Faga in the looks from Small Street Mall. The image is also shot in, there's a few areas I think, you know, that have, I guess, reflect this idea of like limitlessness and transformation. But this area called Mayfair is certainly like one of these areas. So through the course of like, we shot this on one day. So it was like a Sunday after we had done the shopping on Saturday, and we sort of like just drove through the city, moving through locations. I think very small team. I think we were just two cars following each other. So this is like one of the images shot in one of the areas that I mentioned. This is a portrait shot also in a very interesting area called Kensington. But this shot in particular was a homage to one of the members of Threesome, Amstel, and Amstel is actually the only surviving member of the group. So the hair here is inspired by Amstel. Amstel always wears the hair like super long braids. This is, and actually one thing I didn't mention, all these images so far, images that were not included in the exhibition, or they were not included in the issue of Aperture as well. I thought it could be interesting to show them on this platform. So this is another image. This was shot in Yeovil as well. And it was shot like in the tavern in Yeovil. But I guess it's like a bar that's, you know, like Yeovil has seen, you know, a lot of transformation. I think, you know, this is the third or fourth iteration of this like, you know, bar, which has seen like, yeah, different groups of people, generations. And it keeps on sort of changing, testament to like the elusiveness of Johannesburg. And I think, yeah, this image really captures, you know, the sort of like energy and vibrancy of like queer culture in Johannesburg. You know, it's got an attitude, and even, you know, with the, you know, like Ngenapi, it's quite like a, yeah, what's considered as like an African proverb, but it's like it's a little bit ironic because it's like it's something that's just like a sort of like, you know, sassy retort that you would give to someone if they like get into your business, you know. So it's like, how do you like, or how's this your business sort of thing. Okay, and this is one of the images that did make it. So yeah, I won't speak about that one. These images also made it as well. I guess the one thing to mention in this one, this was more of like a direct sort of like homage to the film Orlando with this sort of like ruffle like neckline. And this image also made it, and this was also shot in Yeovil, and Faga's also here dressed in like pieces which are exclusively from Small Street Mall.
Thank you. Thank you to all of this. It's amazing hearing all the presentations. Thank you, Jamal. Thank you, Jorian. Thank you, Elliott. Just to remind the audience again, if you have any questions, please put it in the chat. We'll make sure to send it to the speakers. But now I'll pass it over to Elliott Ramsey for the conversation.
Sure, thank you, Shayo. And I also just want to be conscious of time. So yeah, just to kind of frame this, it's been so wonderful hearing from the three artists. And in some ways, I feel like a lot of my questions have kind of been answered by your presentations. But again, just to sort of frame this, you know, As You Rise Photography from the Black Atlantic, it features over 100 photographs by nearly 80 artists, drawn from the book of the same name that Aperture published of the Wedge collection. And there's far more photographs in the book than in the exhibition. And interestingly, it wasn't until the show was installed that I noticed this recurring thing that I think I was really drawn to, which was this direct style of portraiture. A lot of the images chosen for the exhibition feature these very imminent encounters between the sitter and the photographer. And what I find thrilling about your three images in particular is that they're kind of outliers. So throughout the what I really enjoy about the images in the show broadly is that even though they're these very direct portraits, they never quite feel confrontational or uncomfortable as one might expect. There's this warmth and reciprocity and a sense of trust and familiarity that I think permeates the show. And this really extends through your photographs as well, except visually, the people that you're photographing aren't necessarily directly engaging with the camera. In fact, they're kind of evading the lens in these imaginative ways. There's body language, there's these strong styling choices, the bright red socks in Elliott's work, that blue mesh in Jamal's, the whole ensemble in Jorian's. And when I think about the fashion in As We Rise, style emerges as kind of an act of declaration and perhaps a form of resistance. Because there's a real sense of people being seen on their own terms instead of that traditional relationship of the photographer controlling every aspect of the image. Maybe this is a response to the long history of colonial and ethnographic photography of Black people in which subjects had no agency. So all three of your pieces really seem to honor the ways in which your collaborators wish to be seen, or even, as the case may be, not seen, and pushing this idea of agency to a new level. So I guess I'm really interested in hearing what kinds of challenges and demands arise from working with subjects on their own terms to tell their stories, or what draws you to making these kinds of images. Jamal, we just heard from you, so maybe I'll quickly throw it back to you and kind of thinking through the extent to how much were you sort of styling this shoot with Faga versus them bringing their own sensibilities to it. Can you talk a little bit about that collaboration?
Yes, sure. So, I mean, I've known Faga for quite a while, and we've worked together before, like this particular project. So the collaboration, it sort of began quite quickly into the process. I reached out to them, I think, along the various stages of the research that I was doing. They were particularly involved with the homage to threesome, which I mentioned earlier, as well as like the styling component. So I also mentioned that we went shopping together, we picked up the clothes together, we styled them together as well. So yeah, the process was like very, very collaborative with them. But I think that sort of comes down to the relationship that we've had, between us. And then in terms of the poses, I would also say, that was collaborative. I would say, Faga has a very sort of solid idea of the way that they want to be represented. And I found in this particular shoot, the ways in which we worked was, having them step in front of the camera, having them sort of pose and move in ways that I guess they felt best represented them and the idea that they were trying to get across. But of course, through the process, and as we developed over the course, of a day or of a look, or whatever it may be, I would also, pick up things as I was looking through the viewfinder and, suggest, ways to, kind of move and pose. But I would say it's also drawing, because of the sort of like nature of something like this being very collaborative, but at the same time, drawing from like many different sort of practices, drawing from like fashion photography, drawing from the event photography that I've done, and bringing all of those things, to the shoot.
That's really interesting. Your process really does remind me of Jorian's, and and having working with people who you have this kind of long relationship with, and really thinking about the site and the location and this kind of context. And so Jorian, I'm curious to hear from you in terms of this sort of mood board process that you work with your collaborators. And I really love this sense of the subject, or the person in the photograph, not as a subject, but as a collaborator and a co-creator. That's really cool. But I'm curious, as you're kind of mood boarding, are you starting, do you more or less work with things that your sitter has already? Are you working with things on hand? Are you kind of like, or are you kind of imagining what you want this shoot to be, and then sourcing material or wardrobe for it? What's that kind of mood boarding process like? And do you really try to work around found materials, what's on hand, where you are, or how far, I suppose, do you get from that?
It really is a mix of all those things you mentioned. This shoot in particular, the two women, they're both designers. So some of the pieces are things that they actually made themselves. So for this one, when we did build the mood board, they already did have clothing that they wanted that would fit kind of the theme of this shoot. And so the mood board was more referencing in terms of, maybe posing or lighting, which the lighting on that day was something I couldn't really control. We were hoping to have, like a brighter day, but it was very overcast and kind of gloomy and rainy part of the day. So that went in a different direction. But in terms of the styling, they're all pieces that they had made already, or just had on hand that kind of fit the mood board that we came up with. Yeah.
Huh. That's really cool. I did not know they were designers, but that kind of explains a lot. They're such fantastic looks. Elliott, are you still there?
I'm still here.
Okay. Because thinking about this idea of kind of like the specificity of site and context, I was really struck by your talking about sort of observing these natural behaviors and then having them kind of repeated for the camera so that they become, somewhat theatrical, almost like this kind of still. Is this still a way in which you work, or how did that process kind of resolve for you? I find that really interesting, and I guess also, are you as the photographer, how aware, I guess, is the subject of the particular behavior or action that you want to capture?
It is still the way that I work. In fact, most of the images that I make recently are all improvised. Also, apologies for the excess in background noise. I was actually kicked out of my last location, and now on my phone in a park nearby. So again, apologies for any random sounds. But yeah, I work still from like this process of like really excessive observation, documenting things kind of like with an iPhone. If I don't really have the opportunity to document it in that way, I'll write about it, and then I'll try to recreate that observation, or rather I'm recreating a series of observations and then asking people who I think can kind of begin to forget the camera is there, or in other words, are maybe just like good actors, or can be a good actor for this particular observation. I ask them to improvise it. So I have maybe about 40% of what I want to see understood already, and then the rest is kind of understood through collaboration with the people that I invite to help make the image. But in the case of the image that's in the show, that was from a time where I was like lugging around photo equipment like almost everywhere that I went, so that if I felt called to make an image in real time, I could do so. But that doesn't happen as much anymore.
It's funny to say that you didn't like that image at first, or as you shared in your presentation, because it's such a terrific photograph. All of your works are. But yeah, I'm interested in what you said just now about recreating an observation, and that's such a beautiful and complicated thing to do, because observations are such not only, I think, passing things, but you really kind of make an observation once that first time. So to recreate it is a really interesting challenge. And all of the images, I think, all three of yours have this kind of performance-like aspect to them. They kind of suggest documentation of an event in progress. They also seem to take cues from editorial photography and fashion, where the image is very much the end in itself. And we've seen some of your, I mean, I think, Elliott, you shared with us some of your influences. Jamal and Jorian, not necessarily so much. And so I'm interested to know kind of maybe, and you as well, Elliott, and maybe we'll start with you. What was it that made you take up photography in those days when you were lugging around photo equipment everywhere you went? I guess, like, just very simple question. Why? What was it that had inspired or provoked you to make images?
So I had always been making photographs, but I didn't really start making photographs as a way to think or identify or organize the world until undergrad, or maybe in the year before undergrad. But a friend had told me that she wanted to be a fashion photographer in 10th grade. I didn't know what that was. She pointed me to America's Next Top Model. And, the whole time that I had watched that show, I didn't realize that Nigel Barker was a real photographer. I thought that he was an actor. But even still, as an actor, I didn't think to myself, oh, he's acting out a role that exists in real life. Like a photographer is something that you can be in real life. So prior to that, I had actually wanted to be an actor, but then I learned about fashion photography. And that was really what just introduced me to the idea that photography could be a profession. So fashion still kind of plays a role in my work. I still work in editorial commission. I'm interested in clothing, but it isn't so much like the principal way that I work in photography or that I think about photography. But it is the way that a lot of photographers, I think, come into learning that this is how to be a photographer, because it's so pervasive.
Right, of course. Yeah, editorial photography, absolutely. That's thank you for sharing that with us. That, as someone who also watched America's Next Top Model, I feel you. Jorian, did you what was kind of your artistic influences and kind of thinking about the way you wanted to make images and how you kind of situate them?
Yes, I had always been like into photography, but like Elliott, I didn't really know it could be a profession. I feel like when you have immigrant parents like that, I feel like photography and like this art is not really like a job. So it had always been really a hobby for me. But I kept going back to photography again. Like I was really just, the one in the friend group that had the camera and would like document everything. We could just be at school and I'd have my camera just photographing us in our uniforms. Like, so yeah, it was just something I kept coming back to. Like after graduating high school, I went into early childhood literally for a semester, and I was like, this is definitely not what I want to do. It was always photography, but I didn't really know how, and yeah, I took a little break from school and was working to start thinking more, again, just thinking more about photography. I had kind of been into fashion photography as well. And then when I finally had started school, I decided that I would go to school for photography and, learn a little bit more of the technical aspects and just a little more history, and then, kind of go from there. So yeah, that was kind of my start. Yeah.
Amazing. And Jamal, what about you? What was, I mean, you were involved with many initiatives and collectives, very active. And so I guess, how did that all begin for you?
Certainly. So I think my sort of journey began in fashion school. So I studied fashion design, and when I was in fashion design school, I was very fortunate to, meet an amazing group of friends who we shared a lot of interests together. And I guess then it wasn't formally a collective, but we sort of, as a group started to work together, started to make images together. And this was like the sort of like mid 2000s when blogging, started becoming a thing, and all these different cities, had their, own like street style blogs. So we started creating like I guess we did like street style photography, but also started creating like editorials for like our blog essentially. And at the time I was styling, but over time I really felt an impulse to be able to create these images without needing a photographer, because at the time it was more like styling and an art direction. And this is when I sort of seriously picked up the camera. And it was I guess it was like a way to be able to create the images that I wanted to and tell the stories that I wanted to.
Amazing. It's interesting that there's this, I mean, and sort of self-evident in a way that there's this sort of strong relationship to fashion and editorial photography through all of your images, and they sit so well, I think, with just kind of like the street photography and social documentary and As We Rise. So it's I really enjoy that dynamic and how these images of style. I think, the name of this talk is Style and Resistance, and I think that those two things really do, as we've seen, go together. I only see one question from the audience, so I'll fire it off quickly, and it's to you, Elliott, and it's very simple. Why didn't you like Devin in Red Sox when you first took it?
I can't really remember exactly why, but if I had to guess, it probably has something to do with the lighting. I just maybe wasn't feeling it. And then I think maybe as well, like the obscuring element of like the towel was just so obvious and like straightforward to me that it maybe seemed a little corny, but people really like that image. And I grew to like it as well. So here it is.
Yeah, it's funny because I think, at least when I was working from thumbnails early on in the exhibition, I just assumed he was holding the towel in front of him. And then I was like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. And I was like looking very close and I was like, oh, and then I got the pose. It was kind of it was a funny image to kind of like have to do a double take on and kind of like interpret the body around. So yeah, so really fun. I think we're about 10 minutes over time. Hopefully a lot of the questions have kind of been addressed through all that you've shared. So I'll just wrap up by, saying thank you to all of you, and to our audience. For those of you who are able to make it to the exhibition, As We Rise runs until May 14th here in Vancouver. And in the show, there's this salon style spread of mostly contemporary photography, but it's anchored by these iconic images from Jamal Shabazz and Barclay Hendricks in the 1980s, photographing New York around the emergence of hip hop in the mainstream and this moment of celebration. And all of the works that are together on this wall portray the encounter with the camera as something not intimidating or forced, but as something playful and joyful and empowering. And it's in this spread that Jorian's work, Jamal's work, and Elliott's work all feature. And I couldn't be more pleased. Yeah, thank you all for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Gabriel.